You're listening to Surviving and Thriving with Renisha, a podcast about life, mental health, and personal growth. Here I talk about my journey living with borderline personality disorder, depression, and anxiety, and how I'm learning to love myself despite it. Let's get into it. Hi! Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am so happy to be recording today and to be back. Before we get started with today's episode, I just want to share that I have had to be MIA for the past couple of weeks because a lot of very unexpected, serious things have happened in my life. A lot of family issues, breakdowns. And I honestly was just in a place where I was completely not stable. I've had to take some time to really just get myself back into balance and get myself back into a state to where I can show up for myself, for my family, and just figure out like the right way to move forward. And that's been difficult. And I just want to remind those of you who have listened to the podcast and also introduce those of you who may be new here. My name is Rennie, and I do live with borderline personality disorder. I also have depression, anxiety, and complex trauma. I am a neurospicy woman, and I also raise a child on the spectrum who is high support needs. And I don't have a lot of support. So it's been tough. And there are times where being consistent and showing up for this podcast and balancing the demands of my own mental health and parenting and work and when circumstances shift in a way that I didn't anticipate, in a way that gets me out of sorts, it's really hard. Unfortunately, this is not my full-time job, so it's been a challenge, but I'm here now. I'm really excited for today's episode, and just considering everything that's going on right now in the world and everything that's going on for me personally, I really want to talk about just how I've been struggling with balancing, overcoming thought spirals, and feeling like toxic cycles have repeated, right? Um, so we can get into that. And before we do, I really suggest that we all just take a second to take a deep breath together, because there's a lot of heaviness and density in the energies lately. There's a lot of overwhelm right now. I'm feeling like a lot of hopelessness and lack of faith and a lot of anxiety and anger. I know I've been struggling a lot with anger and a lot with anxiety and overwhelm. And I've been working actively to move those feelings and emotions through my body. And so let's just take a second. Let's take a deep breath. Let's breathe in and out. That was needed. And if you need a few more, feel free to take a second and do that. But we're going to get started. We're going to jump right in. So I really want to talk about something that's been coming up for me in this season of life, especially with, everything that I see happening in the collective, like with all of the changes and policy changes and just the fear that's being put out into the collective, and coupling that with what I'm going through personally in my friendships and my relationships with family issues, with my mental health. And it's just got me sitting and thinking about the ways that we kind of describe healing. And I know we've heard things, and I know I say all the time on this podcast that healing is not linear. But I do think that the way that we talk about it and treat it, unfortunately, feels that way a lot of times. Like, it kind of feels like if you're not on an upward trajectory and you're not actively seeing things in your life improve, or the way that you handle things improve, that you're regressing. And I've definitely been in a season of life for the past couple of weeks or so where it felt like I was regressing, where it felt like old patterns and maladaptive coping mechanisms were resurfacing in my life, where it felt like relationships were falling through, where I was falling back into a little bit of old habits when it comes to how I respond emotionally to people and to things and situations that are overwhelming me or are bringing up triggers for me or are causing me a lot of stress. And I think before we start to get deeper into what we can do about that and how we could have a little bit more grace with ourselves as we're working through the healing journey, I just want to take time to acknowledge that a lot of times, especially in the mental health and especially in the spiritual communities, there's a lot of dismissing and bypassing of the impact of social determinants of health. And this is a big deal to me because we can't sit here and kind of blame people for having a difficult time staying balanced and keeping their emotions in check, especially if they're people who are already healing from significant trauma or have severe mental health issues and mental illnesses. It's, to me, frustrating that we can focus on as individuals what people should be doing to keep themselves in balance and not be talking about some of these larger issues that are at play that are influencing people's livelihoods and their ability to keep themselves in balance. So, for example, with all of the anti-DEI pushback that's happening, that's impacting people's careers and jobs. My industry, my career is directly impacted by that. I work in media relations and PR. I've been supporting community-based organizations. These communities are directly impacted by everything that's going on right now. If you're in an immigrant household or a community, these are things that are impacting you. And if you feel like they're not directly impacting you, they probably are directly impacting people in your community. And at some point, it's possible that it could directly impact you as well. And so the list can go on and on of the ways in which the things that we're seeing happening on a larger scale can impact someone's mental health and their ability to keep themselves emotionally balanced at this time. And I've harped on and on about this in the past, but it frustrates me to no end that we have this very hyper individualistic approach to healing that decenters community and centers the role in having support of people around you and healthy environments around you and circumstances that contribute to positive mental, physical, emotional health. And so I just want to call that out because I think that in a lot of the content that I see, I still see a lot of content that, even though it's well meaning, it's putting all of the onus on you as an individual. And I just want to say that I'm someone who is trying to take a decolonial approach to healing and something that I feel like is rooted in what my ancestors would have done. And I believe that my ancestors would come together and support one another and build together. And if someone in the community was imbalanced, I believe that the community would rally around that person to help them become whole or remember their wholeness, as I should say. And I feel like that's been lost, and it's been lost because we live in a culture that focuses so much on output because of capitalism, focuses so much on what you as an individual is responsible for, and it decenters the role of other people and community and support in that. So I have to say that because there's so much going on in the world, and I think that the last thing we should do is guilt ourselves for not feeling okay. In fact, I feel like if you feel okay right now, I'm a little bit more concerned about you because it's normal. It shows that you're an empathetic person. It shows that you're a human. Not only that, maybe you are directly impacted, but you have empathy for those who are. And that's normal. Like, we are wired to respond to threats. And right now, a lot of people are feeling and are being specifically attacked and threatened. So I just want to put that out there before I dive into this because I don't want any of this to sound like I'm just dismissing the real impact of all of the different current events on our mental and emotional and spiritual well-being at this time. But what I will say is that if you are someone like me and you're navigating severe mental illness, you're navigating healing from complex trauma, and you do feel out of sorts at this time, it is still possible to find support, to find balance, and to get yourself in a place where you feel okay. You might not feel 100% at your best, but you feel okay. That is still possible. And this is something that I've been actively trying to focus on at this time, because again, if you are not feeling okay, it's near impossible for you to show up for others. I know that a lot of us, we want to show up for our families, we want to show up for the work that we do and the projects and things that we care about and are passionate about. And a lot of times we guilt ourselves when we're not, or we feel like we're not able to do that. And I feel like we almost feel ashamed when we have to turn back inwards and when we have to, revisit things that we thought maybe we'd already worked through. And so I'm really hoping that we recognize that there will be seasons like this where things just catch us off guard, where things just kind of feel like they're being turned upside down, where old wounds resurface to be further worked through and healed. And I think the best thing we can do is give ourselves grace and have patience with ourselves as we're moving through this, because it's not easy. It's not easy. And a lot of people right now are struggling. So I just want to reflect on how I've noticed for myself personally. I kind of had gotten to a place with my mental health journey where I was trying to actively not identify with the label of borderline personality disorder or complex trauma. Like, I don't really like overly identifying with these labels or diagnoses. One, because I read a lot, and a lot of the research suggests that they're still learning so much about these things, especially in communities of color and especially in women, because so much of the research initially was done on white men. So a lot of these labels aren't, I really truly believe, based off of what I'm reading and the research and the things that people in this field talk about, the label BPD, for example, will probably not be the same label in the next 50 years. They'll probably have a completely different understanding of these illnesses. And so I found that when I was overly identifying, I feel like I was allowing that to be my story. And I was moving through the world as someone who has BPD and just being like, well, I have BPD. Well, I have BPD. So there's nothing I can really do. It's not my fault. I have BPD. And it became, I don't want to say an excuse, but I do think that it became toxic in a sense, to where I kind of felt powerless. And I feel like for me in my journey, recognizing my own power and autonomy and my own recovery has been pivotal in healing, and obviously finding supportive people who understand as well, because illnesses like BPD, bipolar, and so forth are very stigmatized. Um, but I've gotten back to a place where I feel like I started to identify with these emotions again, because I was noticing these older unhealthy patterns resurface in my life, and I wasn't sure why. I wasn't understanding why it was coming up. And I think I had a moment where I was like, well, you know, the doctors told me and the therapists told me and the communities have told me that this is a lifelong journey, and, you'll have issues with these illnesses for the rest of your life. And I kind of spiraled into a depressive episode where I was hyper fixated on, if I had a moment where I felt like old wounds or old habits or old patterns resurface, that meant that, oh, it was kind of reinforcing, oh, I am very ill. Oh, I am very mentally ill. Oh, I'm going to be struggling with this for the rest of my life. And I've since obviously focused on getting my nervous system regulated so that I can really sit with the emotions and feelings that were coming up, so I can really objectively examine why I felt like I was quote unquote regressing, or these old toxic quote unquote behaviors were resurfacing. And I had to sit and be honest and acknowledge that, yes, there are some habits that I have that are rooted in trauma and are trauma based and aren't healthy and should be healed. But at the same time, having the more balanced approach is not to just say, oh, well, it's just I have BPD and there's nothing I can do about it. Rather, I had a moment where these things resurfaced. So why are they resurfacing, and what are they trying to tell me about my needs? What wounds have I not yet addressed? How can I give myself space to sit with these emotions that are coming up in healthier ways? What do I need that I feel like I'm not getting at this time? So I started to ask myself these healthy questions and remind myself that even though there will be moments where I do feel like I'm slipping back into these old patterns, I am a different person now and I have different skills now. And I do have the ability to move through these things. And I do have access to and people around who can support. And if I don't have that, then I know that there are people out there that I can find, and I will do whatever I need to do to find the support that I need. And that's kind of the approach that I've been taking. And so recently I've had some interpersonal communications relationships that have broken through, friendships, family issues, and it brought up a lot of those old wounds and it triggered me a lot. And I'm someone that at this stage of my mental health recovery, I've come to understand the importance of being triggered and recognizing that you being triggered is not someone else's responsibility. It's your responsibility how you manage your emotions and what you move through and what you choose to do once you are triggered. If you do feel like it's someone who has crossed a boundary, then it's your responsibility to set a boundary. If you feel like this trigger is bringing up an old wound, then it's your responsibility to heal that wound. But at the same time, you do deserve to have support. You do deserve to have community. You deserve to have people around who are understanding and kind and compassionate. So having that more nuanced and balanced approach to it is what I've been working to do, and that's very hard for me. One of the old things that have come up for me that I've really been struggling with is pushing people away. I think I'm someone who has historically flipped back and forth between an anxious attachment style and an avoidant attachment style. And trying to find the balance into a secure attachment style has been quite the journey, and it's one that I'm still on right now. I've definitely recently been very triggered by people who I feel like aren't making me feel seen or heard or valued. And I had to sit with myself and tell myself that that is okay. It is okay to want people to see you, to hear you, to understand you. This is a basic human need and it's normal to want that. And also, I think every single one of us deserve that. The problem lies in how I respond and react when I'm not feeling that that's the case in relationships. So if there's a relationship where I feel like I'm not being heard, or I am feeling dismissed, or I am feeling unseen, how can I communicate that in a healthy way? And for me, my communication style in relationships historically has been poor. I am someone who overshares and over communicates, and I'm someone who has kind of overcompensated for a long time. I used to be in my younger years very much a people pleaser. I used to try to mold and fit into what I thought people wanted so that I could be accepted, so that I could feel heard, so that I could feel seen. Whereas now, as I've been going through my healing journey, I find myself on the flip side of that completely, where I'm someone who is avoidant and pushes people away. I will not hesitate to cut someone off and just end a relationship if I feel like a certain need isn't being met, or I feel like I don't feel heard. And I know that I've had episodes where I talked about relationships are not just transactional and they're not just there to meet your needs, and people aren't drugs. But there are times where I struggle with that, and it's because I have some deal breakers, and I think that we all have deal breakers in relationships. A big trigger for me is not feeling heard. Not feeling heard, because obviously this is rooted in childhood trauma for me. There was a lot of circumstances and situations where I was being harmed, or I needed support and I needed help and I wasn't heard, or I didn't feel heard. And so this is a very difficult feeling for me to move through at this stage of my life. If I feel like decisions are being made without my input, if I feel like my ideas aren't being, taken into account in work environments, if I feel like in relationships or friendships, I'm addressing a need and it's kind of being met, in a way that's kind of dismissive, or in a way that's kind of like, well, I don't really care because, this is what I got going on. It's really hard for me to give people grace. It's really hard for me to be understanding. And it's really hard for me to say in a healthy way, okay, that's fine. This is not working for me. Let me take a step back. Instead, I tend to, and I think the term we would use in the BPD community is split on people, but I definitely get this all or nothing, like, okay, if I don't feel heard in this specific circumstance, then this person must be terrible and they must have never cared about me. And so I start to get that catastrophic thinking. And so I wanted to kind of go through some ways that we can kind of learn when we do actually need to set boundaries and we do need to make changes in our relationships because of what someone else is doing and how that may not be aligned with what it is that we feel we deserve or what our values are, versus when we might be doing something that is rooted in a trauma response or a maladaptive coping mechanism or maladaptive coping skill. So how can we recognize where we need to do the work versus where others maybe we need to change our relationships with those around us, and sometimes it's both. And so those those situations, I don't feel like we're really taught, if especially if you're someone who grew up in, dysfunctional, unhealthy environments like I did. It's really hard to learn. And so I'm reminding myself that life is school. I'm in a classroom. This is a lesson, right? And trying to find more balance and ultimately trying to, have more faith and include more love in all of this, more love and grace for myself, more love and grace for others. But you can do that and still take care of yourself. You can do that and still set boundaries. And so I just want to talk about a couple ways that you can maybe recognize when something is an unhealthy coping mechanism versus when something, maybe someone just overstepped a boundary, or maybe something is just not aligned for you, which is also okay. But recognizing the difference is important, because if you're like me and you really just struggle with interpersonal communications and relationships, and you just feel like I can't, like, friendships aren't working out, relationships aren't working out, my relationships and work environments are always kind of tense. Am I the problem? What's going on? Like, what needs to change? Am I the one that's causing an issue, or am I just not in aligned connections, aligned relationships, aligned environments? Because that can be really hard if you're someone who struggles with emotional regulation, mental illness, or you have trauma, or if you're just neurospicy. All of these things are hard, and it's things you have to learn. So one thing that's come up for me is if the emotional intensity feels overwhelming and it feels out of proportion for the circumstance, then you might need to sit back and reevaluate whether this is a trauma response. And a question you can ask yourself or journal about is this related to an old wound? Like, is this connected to something from maybe the past that has happened to me? Or does this make sense for the current situation? And if you feel like you need to talk to someone about this, if you do have access to therapy or counselors, that's a great question to kind of work through with those people, or just someone in your life that you trust to have this conversation with and you trust their input. But be careful of that, because, when people have bias and people love you, I think it can be really difficult for you to get that objective perspective that you might need to move through whatever you're moving through at that time. Another question is there a particular fear that's driving this? Like, do you feel like this is a fear-based response? Is there a core fear that's being touched or triggered? And do you feel like your response is being driven by that fear versus maybe what someone else is doing that might not be aligned to a value? So how can we determine if this is a fear that's rooted in maybe, so a lot of times when we have traumas or we have wounds from the past, there are fears attached to those. That is a core emotion that is attached to a lot of trauma for many, right? And that drives, you know, issues like anxiety, which is something I struggle with. And so sometimes I have to ask myself, like, is this my anxiety? Is this my fear? Or is the circumstance just not aligned with my values? Or is there a boundary being crossed? And sometimes it's both. So that can be really tricky. Um, and it can be really hard to know what the appropriate response is considering that. And sometimes you might just need to take a little bit of a step back while you process and kind of work through and figure that out. Um, and then another thing is to think about, like, the thoughts that you're having. Do you feel like there's a familiar sense of shame or guilt, or like similar thought patterns that you're noticing that comes up in these situations? Do you say things to yourself like, people always do this to me, or people never show up for me? Or do you say things like, it's always my fault, or I always ruin things, or I'm always pushing people away, or I'm always messing things up? If you're noticing these same thoughts start to come up in situations or conflicts, then it could be that you might feel like you might be kind of repeating some of the old things that you experienced. And it's really annoying, but when you have trauma and you have a lot of like past wounds, sometimes we almost subconsciously get used to these circumstances, and our brain kind of, our nervous system has like adjusted to that type of life. And so we tend to kind of replay these things, and it's not something we're consciously doing. It's not something we want to do. And that's why it can feel frustrating, because we're like, I don't like this, I hate this, but why do I keep thinking this way, or why do I keep doing these things? And it could just be that that wound has not really been fully tended to. It hasn't been fully addressed. And that's frustrating, because a lot of times we think that we're addressing it. And I'm at that place now where I'm just like, are you serious? I thought I worked through all of this. And I'm realizing there's more. There are like more layers. Like I always say, healing is like an onion, and you think you're done, you think you got through a layer, and then there's another layer underneath. And it can be frustrating. One thing that I will say that I hope will give you some sense of hope, especially if you're someone who has BPD or a severe mental illness, is every single person, whether they are diagnosed with a mental illness or not, is going through this journey if there's someone who wants to live a happy, fulfilled life. Because healing is hard, and every single person has to heal from something. And it may be harder for those of us who have these illnesses, or who have trauma, or who don't have yet the emotional regulation skills, but those are things that can be acquired. And every single one of us has the opportunity to shift in that way, because we all have brains, and all of our brains are capable of great, amazing things, because science, neuroplasticity, we can shift our minds, we can shift our brains, we can heal. It's harder for some than others. But I promise you, the more you go and you meet people, the more you realize so many people are on this journey, whether they have the exact same issues as you or not. So when you start to feel like you're alone and no one else is going through this, I promise you, every single time I felt that way, and I've allowed myself to go out and connect with others and get vulnerable, I realized just how false that is, and how everyone is fighting a battle that you're not seeing. So you're not alone. It's hard, it's frustrating, but there are other people out there doing it. And if you can be vulnerable enough to open up about what you're going through, you can find those people. And it just makes life easier, just knowing that there are other people who understand and who are going through things as well. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I think that when we get into a state where we recognize we're repeating these thoughts, we're repeating these patterns, we're going back into these old habits, and we're like, why? Oh my God, why am I doing this? It can feel like isolating. It can feel like we're the only one in the world that has this issue. And I just want to continuously remind you all that you are not alone. I'm going through it. So many of us are going through it. So, a couple other things. I want to talk about some signs that your boundaries are actually being crossed, as opposed to maybe some old wounds are coming up, or maybe some trauma responses, or things you still need to heal and work through. So if you feel like you have done your absolute best to communicate your needs clearly, effectively, in a healthy way, and this is something I struggle with, because I will try to do this, and then as soon as I don't like a response, it's like flips, split, you're dead to me. And splitting is really hard, because in a second, someone I love so much, I don't, it's like that side of me comes out, and I'm like, well, sorry, I tried, and now this is your response. And so I'm still learning that we have to understand that we can still respond a certain way, regardless of what someone else's response is. Um, because it's about what you're trying to communicate about your needs and what you are trying to learn. And if someone responds in a way that's triggering to you, just learning to take a step back is really difficult, but it's necessary. And so if you do feel like you've communicated your needs, if you feel like the person continuously disregards your needs, that is a boundary issue. If you feel like you have more than once communicated, this isn't working for me, and you tried to do this effectively, you try to say, this isn't feeling good to me, I don't feel good, this doesn't make me feel good, this makes me feel dismissed or unheard or unsafe or unseen, And the response is kind of like, in so many words, I don't care, or there's nothing I can do about that, or I'm sorry you feel that way. Then to me, that's a situation that feels like a boundary issue, or that it could be out of alignment. And also, just this is something that I'm still learning, but having grace with people, because like I said, everyone is going through something. Every single one of us is going through something. There have been times, many times, where people have come to me and communicated their need in that way, and they communicated effectively. And I was just not in a position to hear it because of what I was working through. I wasn't in a position to show up and be a good friend or be a good partner or a colleague, because I just wasn't in a position to where I had the capacity, the mental, emotional capacity, or desire, to be honest, to do so, because I was hyperfixated or focused on whatever it was that I was going through. So whatever they were coming at me with just felt like another problem I didn't need. And I had to be honest with myself about that. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, right? And so those people might see me as a villain now, but that's what I'm trying to remind myself now that I've been in more circumstances like this, where I'm reminding myself every single person is a human. And I think our culture, unfortunately, we can dehumanize one another, especially if we disagree with one another. It's kind of scary. If someone doesn't agree with someone else, immediately it's like we see them as less of a human being. And that's not okay. We are all human beings. All of us are human beings. And whether we agree with people or not, that doesn't make them any less human. I'm not someone that's for dehumanizing anybody, whether it's a homeless person on the street, whether it's someone in administrative power we do not like. These are still human beings. Okay. So I just want to throw that out there. And one thing that I've just been reminding myself is that when someone has a response that I don't like, I can give them grace. I can understand that, okay, they might be going through something. They may be going through a hard time. They might genuinely want to be there, but they don't have the capacity, and actually still tell myself, but this is what I need right now. So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to focus on getting what it is that I feel like I need or feels more aligned for me at this time. And learning to do that without feeling like I'm blowing everything up or in an explosive and unhealthy and, chaotic way is a journey, because my entire life, when there was conflict or when things just weren't aligned for people, and what should have just been a little conversation of, right now I'm really feeling like I need relationships like this. You might not align with that. You feel like you need relationships like this. I still have so much love for you. But I'm gonna have to take a step back for a little bit. What should have just been that for me growing up was always violence, was always chaos, was always just, so my brain got used to that. It's like, okay, we got a disagreement, it's about to go down, right? That's just like immediately when I feel like I'm being disagreed with or unheard, my brain automatically goes there. It's like from 0 to 100, because that's the type of environment I grew up in. And so learning, no, I can actually calm down and this is okay. And like I said, everyone goes through different things and they have different capacities. And also, it's completely normal for us to grow apart and to have, to just not be aligned with people during different seasons of our lives, especially for someone who is in the process of actively trying to grow and evolve as a human being. So, recognizing when you might need to just take a step back or set some boundaries. There are times when you really do just need to just completely end the relationship, but that doesn't have to be the case all the time. And that's something I'm still actively learning. And Spirit, God is working with me every day on that. And it's hard. It's hard. So give yourself grace. You probably will make mistakes. You probably will fail, and that's part of the process of learning. I think when it comes to relationships, we kind of forget that this also takes practice. It's really easy when you're playing a sports game and you're not making the shot, you're not kicking the ball in, to be like, I made a mistake. That feels like crap. But when it comes to relationships, I think you also need to recognize you will lose some people in the process of learning. And that's okay, because you're learning. And as long as you continue to practice, as long as you continue to try, at some point you will be able to have the types of relationships and be in the environments that make you feel safe and make you feel supported. So you just got to keep trying as hard as it is. You got to keep going. Um, I will say some other things to be wary of when it comes to other people potentially crossing your boundaries, and kind of recognizing where you might need to set some boundaries or take a step back or just move away from the relationship altogether, is if you're continuously feeling emotionally drained by a particular person or environment. You feel like there's resentfulness, or you feel like there's a kind of depletion after you're spending time with them, or you find yourself feeling confused, or you're questioning things. You're questioning where you stand with this person. Anytime I start to question where I stand with someone, I feel like I need to take a step back. Anytime I start, because I you can feel it if you are really in tune with yourself. You can kind of feel like, okay, there's something there, and it's not being openly addressed, and you can actively choose to talk about it. If the other person's not open to it, then that might that might be your warning that you need to take a step back. You need to take a step back. If you feel like your experiences are being minimized or gaslighting, and I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but if someone's telling you you're too sensitive all the time, or stop making things a big deal, no, no, that's not your person. The people in your life will make you feel heard, okay? Now, this is different than if you are someone who is continuously catastrophizing and you are always triggered. And by always, I mean like every interaction, like you can't hold yourself accountable. Then that's where some inner work, some shadow work is needed from your end. That requires a lot of self-awareness. So if you know, like I know, I've sat with myself, I've come to you in a reasonable manner, and you're continuously dismissing me, that's not someone that you need in your life. Again, continuously, because there are times when people make mistakes, right? And so learning to give each other grace. But also, like, if you're feeling like you have to kind of consistently bend your will, or you have to become someone else, or you have to shrink yourself, or it just feels unequal, it feels unreciprocal, like you feel like you're showing up in a way that's super vulnerable, or you're trying to do all the communication, or every time there's a conflict you're the one that speaks up, or you're the one that's scheduling time to connect, or you're the one that's reaching out. If it feels unreciprocal, whether that be unreciprocal emotionally, like if you're always being vulnerable but then the other person kind of shuts down, or you just don't hear from them, or if you're trying to communicate and then the other people just don't want to communicate, or they don't want to address the issue, or like a lot of people nowadays are very conflict avoidant, but I am someone who believes that conflict is healthy and necessary. Otherwise, you're just sounding boards for each other. And I just don't agree that every single person in your life should agree with every single thing that you say. So if you find yourself trying to address root issues and trying to, in my opinion, deepen the relationship, and you're finding that basically impossible because the other party is just not willing to work with you, then that's also something that you should take a step back from. And again, evaluate if that person's going through things, and if maybe this is just a blip in the road versus if this is just the way that they are, and it just not aligned with you. So those are some things that I'm doing. There are some things that I'm journaling right now to kind of help me dig into this more and just think about the current triggers that have been coming up for me. And I have been able to recognize that some of the things that I'm struggling with are rooted in some things that happened in the past, versus others are more just about the direction I feel like I'm heading and what's not really feeling like it's resonating for me at this time. Um, and so, yeah, just figuring that out requires a lot of sitting with yourself, reflecting, having time for stillness, or journaling, connecting with a therapist or counselor or someone you trust, and having those deep conversations and really asking yourself the tough questions. Um, so I encourage that at this time, but I also just want to again acknowledge something I touched on in the beginning, that this is a difficult season for so many people. So if people are acting out of sorts, it's because a lot of people are in fear and anxiety right now because of everything going on in the world. And so the energies are very heavy, and it could be easy for people to act out of character, or to adopt some of those survival skills that they had to adopt in the past. And so I think the best thing that we can do right now is try to have grace with ourselves and grace with others. If you are if you are genuinely in an unsafe environment or in predicaments that have long been just feeling unwell for you or making you uncomfortable or making you feel hurt or unheard, then yes, always take time to evaluate that and step back and take care of yourself. But anyway, I said a lot of words and I said them very quickly. So I appreciate those of you who stayed with me up until now. And I truly hope that every single one of you take care of yourselves. Find people, places, spaces that make you feel seen and heard and truly valued and appreciated. And I'm sending you as much love as I can muster at this time. And until next time, bye.